Hello, my name is John Blichmann, and we are joined today by Mike from Bitter Reality Brewing and our very own Preston Voglund with engineering here. So today we're going to talk a bit about glycol chillers for home brewing, and Mike has recently bought a glycol chiller and did a lot of research. Tell us about your recent purchase.
I really looked for a system that was flexible because I can't see tomorrow. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I don't know if I'm only going to do 3, 4, 5 systems or if I need more. And for me, the Blichmann system just seemed the most expandable. It had, I know a lot of people look at it and go, hey, it doesn't have this built in. Those are things that I get to choose what I want, and on top of that, I don't have to worry about something built in that fails. It just really met my needs for now, and I feel like it's going to expand down the road, which is huge for me because I'm always, if you've seen my channel, I'm always doing things and I'm always learning and growing. You look at a system and you look at do-it-yourself, and you assume that the system is just a very refined do-it-yourself air conditioner in a bath with a bunch of coils, and it's been purposely designed. So you think and you expect the same thing you're going to have from the do-it-yourself may not be as bad, but you still expect all those same things. You expect the loud motor. You expect heat coming off of it constantly because it's basically I'm making this cold, but I have to get rid of that heat, and to get rid of the heat, it has to go somewhere. Yep. And the heat's very minor. And I did expect mine to run all the time, and it doesn't. It runs a little while and it stops. And unless I'm standing right next to it, and my brew space, I mean, it might be 470 square feet, so it might seem big, but it's not that big to me. I mean, it's like this room twice. But I don't hear it at all unless I'm standing right next to it. And I got to kind of pay attention to it because I got a fridge nearby and it probably makes more noise, and it's a recent Samsung that's much louder. So yeah, these are things I didn't expect, or things I did expect that didn't happen, which were in a positive way. They weren't bad. They were much better than I expected. The Blichmann chiller is like, it's insignificant. The amount of power that thing uses is very, very minor. And the other thing that was kind of a shock, and this is why I almost did a do-it-yourself build, is I was like, you know what, theirs probably doesn't put out as much heat as if I did a big old AC unit and tried to build this ugly contraption. It barely puts out any heat. You got to stand next to it to feel it. I mean,
yeah. One of the things we get a lot of questions about on our feedback line is, how do I keep my wort and beer at the temperature that I want as it's fermenting, and how do I go about that?
Historically, which most people probably do, is either ferment at room temp, or they ferment in maybe a chamber that they made out of whatever, coolers or whatever. But in glycol systems, not a cheap investment, but if you care about temperature control, you can have a bad brew day, and if you can maintain temperature control, you can come out with amazing beer. Might not be the beer you meant to brew, but it will still taste amazing. And I really want it to be able to not have to worry about dumping out beer, and I want it to produce good beer. And for me, glycol is the only way I'm going to be able to do a true temperature control. If it wasn't the best solution, you wouldn't have all these breweries all over the country only using glycol. They use it for a reason. So it helps with accurate temperature control. And I keep most of my stuff within 1 degree, plus or minus, and it runs just beautifully. And it's had better beer lately too.
Yeah, well, on that point too, it adds consistency to exactly what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to repeat a beer, or if you're trying to follow a recipe right to the T, it's going to be hard to do that if you don't meet the temperature requirements of the fermentation.
Yeah, you can't call the weather guy and go, hey, I want my room to be this temp today.
Yeah, you know, and particularly when you're brewing a recipe in the spring versus the winter versus the summer, and you don't have temperature control, you're trying to find a spot in the house that, one, won't destroy the carpet, or two, that has got a similar temperature. You know, and it really kind of depends person to person, you know, what you're able to do. And if you're going to try to do a lager, that ups the game even more.
I remember a very early beer that I brewed that I had, I wanted to get a little bit cooler than just a typical ale, and I had taken it down to my basement, and I had a little swamp cooler set up where I had a fan running over it, and I had a rag that I kept, you know, keeping it wet and throwing it over the bucket, and there's a lot of work, and you have to monitor it and make sure it stays wet and everything, but a little more autonomous control if you got a glycol chiller.
When you see the temperature do this, you're like, oh!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, you come down, oh, we went up 8 degrees, that's not good.
Just, if you want, hands down, if you want temperature control and you want amazing beer, I don't think there's anything better than glycol systems currently that's out there for any company, even a big brewery. So.
Yeah. I'd say the closest next thing is probably an ice bucket, and if you're trying to recirculate you know, cold water with an ice bucket through a coil, that can get you close, but then it's another thing of monitoring the ice level, buying all the ice. That can be another.
Going home during lunch to swap out some ice back, yeah.
very low upfront cost, but buying ice all the time and having
That would
to
be your
manage
stepping
through that.
stone before going to glycol.
There you go. So, Preston, we have just recently increased the capacity of our Blichmann chiller from 3/8 horsepower to 1/2 horsepower. And that's kind of a unusual unit for heat transfer. And can you talk to us a little bit about what that really means, and how would I compare a Blichmann unit to any of the competitors' units out there, so I know that I'm comparing apples to apples?
Yep, and that's important when you're comparing two different units together. You got to make sure you're looking at the specs that are going to matter. And some of these, the glycol chillers, they tend to be listed. There will be a horsepower listed. There will be BTU, which would be your cooling capacity listed. The spec that is important to focus on more is that cooling capacity. The horsepower that's listed is typically the horsepower of the compressor, but different compressors run at different efficiencies. So you might get a different cooling capacity out of a 1/3 horsepower chiller than a different 3/8 horsepower chiller. So I recommend really looking at the cooling capacity of that. And our chiller, the new 1/2 horsepower Blichmann chiller, that's rated at 3,100 BTUs per hour. And the other side of that BTUs per hour statistic is at what temperature that's rated at. So that rating, our 3,100 BTUs per hour, that's based on the bath temperature in the unit of being 28 degrees Fahrenheit. If we bring that bath up to 34 degrees Fahrenheit, well, then it technically has a 3,400 BTUs per hour cooling capacity. So if you're looking at specs between different chillers and one has a cooling capacity that's rated without a temperature alongside it, well, that's not the complete picture. You want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, and good chiller manufacturers will list that spec on exactly the cooling capacity at a specific bath temperature. So that's important to look at.
What are the common temperatures that people will run their chiller baths at?
If you're doing a cold crash, you're doing a cold lager, you can be down in the 24 to 38 degrees. But if you're just trying to maintain an ale fermentation, you could bring it up a little higher to 40 or so. And it takes a lot less power, a lot less cooling capacity to maintain a 50 degree, 60 degree fermentation than it would be to try and cold crash or keep something down around 35, 38 in there.
And would something with maybe a smaller motor have to work harder, causing it maybe be not as efficient, I would think?
Yeah, definitely. And just, the refrigeration cycle and, the equipment, the manufacturer of that compressor, some of them are just made more efficient than others. And
So you could save money if you got something smaller and power up front, but it would probably cost you more long term.
Yeah, definitely. And power consumption on ours is under 500 watts, so you're not using a lot of electricity to run that.
I will say with the one I have currently, I walk by it when it's cold, I won't say cold crashing, but getting it down to lager temp. And I expect it to be on the back end of an AC, and I really am not. The heat is very mild, and you have to stand right next to it with shorts on for me to feel it hit my leg. Yeah. And it has to be running, because it doesn't always run. It just runs enough to cool down that, and then it does the pump.
And one other thing to factor in too is a chiller system is a system, and the compressor is just one part of it. So you've got evaporators, condensers, and all the other components that go along with that, and they all work as a team. And that's where you're going to get a little bit of differences manufacturer to manufacturer. And, and there's reasons for that. If you design it for a specific temperature, you're going to make different choices. If you're trying to design it to be more broad operation, you're going to make other choices. So those are just all those different factors that are put into these. And we factored it in really for, in this case, for the home brewer or the small pro brewer.
And shocking, I didn't think about this, and it's something you don't think about until you have it. And they see them all the time, so they probably just see it. But I didn't realize it doesn't run all the time. It only runs when it needs to bring down that bath, because then the pump is running to the actual fermentation. So the pumps are running as they need it. That's running as it's needed. It's not all running at once. Sometimes you might walk by and it's quiet for a while. And I didn't think about that. I thought it'd be running all the time. And you barely hear it, I can tell you that too. It's hard to hear unless you're getting next to it.
Yep. And as you mentioned, John, that we picked one out for our, the brewing application. Different compressors are designed for different applications. There's some that are meant to be running 10, 15, 20 degrees below freezing. There's other ones that are better running, right around that freezing temp like where ours is running. And if we tried to, we were very intentional in picking one out that was going to be efficient at that typical 28 to 34 degrees. And if we would have picked one that's supposed to run well at -15, -30 degrees, it wouldn't be giving the good performance that we're getting at.
And you're making me feel good because I usually keep mine between 27 and 34 based on what I'm fermenting. I didn't know what a good range was, but it looks like I'm safe. So.
How did you figure out how much cooling capacity you even needed?
Well, first of all, I'm not an air conditioning guy. I have no clue. I live in Florida. I just want my AC to work. But I started doing research and going down that rabbit hole. I found the BTUs that I would need to get it kind of down into the logger temps as quickly as possible, knowing that I would never need that much power all at once, because who's going to do like 6 brews and drop them all at the same time? I knew I was going to be safe. And I did consider other systems at first because I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, I don't really need that much BTUs. But then I started noticing the efficiencies and I'm like, well, I'd be stupid not to go and do something that's going to not only meet my needs but exceed them slightly. The system it has plugs for 6 systems, and I kind of joked to John earlier, is I could easily throw 8 or 10 pumps in there and I know I would have no problem. I don't have to worry. And I would rather have that product that can exceed my needs a little bit than barely meeting them. Because if it barely meets it, there's going to be times that I would regret my purchase. And with the Blichmann system, I don't regret it at all because I've yet to exceed, I don't think I've exceeded half its capacity. I've had 5 systems on it so far. I haven't been able to top it out at 6 or go to 8 or 10, but eventually I'll get there. But yeah, it performs. As I'd mentioned, I don't feel hardly any heat coming off of it. It's not very loud. These are things that if you look at a do-it-yourself, you expect tons of heat, tons of noise. I don't have any of that. I mean, you got to stand right next to it and pay attention to hear it. The heat you might feel on the hairs of your leg, but it works. And like I said, I'm not an air conditioning guy, and I know anybody out there looking to buy a system is going to go Google research how much BTU, and there's going to be different people, and I joke about your mileage may vary. Some people say you need this much, some people you say, but those numbers, if you take the average, you're going to be in that ballpark. That's why when you mentioned, hey, you want to be between this and this, I'm like, good, I'm in that range. I didn't know I was supposed to be there, but I'm already there. Yeah. You want something that's going to exceed your needs at least a little bit, because you never know what you're going to do tomorrow. You never know if you're going to all of a sudden have a friend come over and say, hey, can I brew this, but I need you to use and you'll get some new friends. Hey, can you help chill my beer down and keep it fermenting in your glycol system? Yeah, it's going to happen.
How did you go about figuring out what the average home brewer would need for capacity?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors that go into that. Depends on what your ambient temperature is going to be. If you're going to have it inside in a room that might only be 65, 68 degrees or something, you're not going to need as much cooling capacity as you would if it's going to be out in your garage somewhere. It might be 80, 90, 100 degrees, I don't know.
Welcome to Florida.
Or if there's humidity, the sweating can make it much more difficult to bring the temperature down.
Insulation?
Yep, whether you're putting a jacket on your fermenter and how well it's insulated, but there's some good baseline numbers that you can consider, and I wrote them down here. For instance, for a 5-gallon fermenter, if you had 5 gallons of wort, for cold crashing, you'd want 350 BTUs per hour. But just for fermenting and maintaining fermentation temperatures for like an ale, you'd only need 50 BTUs per hour. And then if you're maintaining a colder lager fermentation, you might want 100 BTUs per hour.
And so that's for a single 5-gallon?
That'd be for a single 5-gallon. Now, if you scale it all the way up to a 1 barrel, which is another factor that's involved, if you're brewing half a barrel of beer or a barrel of beer, you're going to need more chilling capacity. And with that, at a 1 barrel, reference number here is you'll need 1,500 BTUs per hour to cold crash a 1 barrel fermenter. And that's where you might start to limit it. If you're doing a couple 1 barrel batches, like this chiller can handle it, but you're not going to run 4 or 5.
No, and that doesn't sound much different than a 5-gallon. Yeah, doesn't sound like it needs much more.
So if you were a commercial brewer and you had multiple 1 barrel fermenters per se, our chiller would do a fairly good job. If you're just looking at the numbers and you're crunching numbers, to maintain a lagering temp, you need 450 BTUs per hour on that. Well, ours has 3,100. So you factor that out. I mean, you could probably run 8 different fermenters, 1 barrel fermenters at fermentation temperatures for even a lager. When you go into cold crashing, though, that's when you're really going to be limited on that. If you're not going to be able to crash more than 2 1 barrel fermenters at a time. But something I've seen in some commercial breweries is they'll have 2 or 3 glycol chillers. Once you start stepping up from this 1/2 horsepower size and you start going into a 1 horsepower or 1.5 horsepower chiller, it's not just twice the cost of the chiller that you're seeing. It's going up 4 or 5 times the price point.
Yeah, you've really gone from a home application to an industrial application.
Yeah.
And everything gets scaled up in
Definitely.
in durability and size.
Semi-pro
and
to
expense.
major commercial.
Yeah, but if you're a small tap room and you might just be doing some 1-barrel batches or even 2-barrel batches, that's where you could think about one of these chillers and then scaling it up into 2 of these chillers.
Now, how often should you clean out all that glycol and water? I've been reading that recently, and in the forums, especially like Reddit, you get people like, I just did it, but it's been 3 years, and I mean, you see that 2 and 3 years from a lot of people. I don't know if that's normal or good or bad, or just because this is on Reddit, you don't know who it is.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I've read some things before. Maybe that some people will say, a manufacturer might give a spec too, but the manufacturer is interested in you getting more and selling more and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But glycol can last a pretty long time, but some of them, like the references I've seen, is like every 1 or 2 years. I mean, maybe we're not as good at maintenance here, but we've had our glycol in our glycol chiller for 4 years or 5 years, and it's still keeping it cold.
If it starts turning green, you might want to.
Or you got floaties, or for me, I get spiders maybe, they get in everything else.
Yeah.
I open the thing just before I use it every time, and I just make sure I'm above that level that it says that I have to be above, and I'm like, okay, I'm good. That's all I do so far. That's all I've had to do.
Yeah, make sure you're not running out.
Yeah, I make sure that the pipes are below the level. I usually have it's probably a good solid inch, if not more.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm good. I close it up. I'm rocking and rolling. And then just before I came here, I actually turned my glycol system off because there was nothing fermenting. But I've been known to let it run for like a week or 2 because I forgot to turn it off because there's nothing connected to it. It's just sitting there. And it's really not doing much. I'm like, I don't hear it, so I don't know to turn it off. And then when I do hear it, I'm like, oh crap, I left that on. So, and I know there's time and energy to cool that back down. So,
Now, speaking of glycol, that we didn't touch on, you always want to use propylene glycol, not ethylene glycol, which is the yellow or green stuff. They will both work great. You just might die from one.
oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so propylene glycol is food grade. I think they actually use it for a preservative in Twinkies. I would suggest eating it, but I mean, it's not poisonous. But ethylene glycol that's used in automotive coolants is very poisonous. So that's, I mean, it'll kill pets. It's sweet tasting, so they told me.
The old radiator stuff that would kill cats. And
I wonder who the first person is
that tried it?
that discovered that glycol's sweet.
Yeah, this is a great sweet and
But anyway, that's a very important thing to make sure that you're using a nice quality propylene glycol. Yeah. And then you dilute it based on the manufacturer's recommendation.
Which I see a huge range on that from like everybody.
Yeah, because it can come in different concentrations and all
okay.
that, so then you'll dilute it differently. It's not necessarily that the glycol itself is any different, it's just what concentration are you getting it in and where you need to go with it. Okay. So.
Yeah, I think the 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 is a pretty common mixture, and the more glycol you put in it, the lower temperature you can go. Obviously, you can't go under 32 if you just had pure water in there. It's going to start freezing up. But even if you tried to do just pure water and you get closer to 32, it could start to form ice around the coils because it's going to be colder right there around the coils.
Does glycol weigh the same amount as water?
Water and propylene glycol are completely soluble. In
Okay,
each other,
so they will. Okay, that's what I was thinking. Is if it sits long term, would it separate?
Yeah.
Because I
it
can't
will
notice
not.
they're both clear, so I can't.
No, it's a solution. It's not unlike ethylene glycol in your car.
So it's not like oil and water. It won't
No.
separate. Okay.
No, it'll stay perfectly dissolved.
They're clear, so I can't tell. And I'm looking into a black container, so I just assume they're always good. I have not stirred it, but I just wasn't sure.
Well, in the submersible pumps, just the return line from your glycol loop should be kind of swirling things around a little bit.
And that improves the efficiency of the coils that are transferring heat.
It's moving the liquid around, just like you would for heat dissipation. Okay.
If you're a whirlpool during a boil or something.
It was funny. I was asked this literally a few days after I did it. Thankfully, the Blichmann system comes with casters, and they're nice large casters, so that's not a problem. But what I did, because my entire garage is sloped for drainage, is I took the lid off so I could look in and make sure that I was okay and I wasn't going to slosh it around. And I simply just unplugged it and wheeled it across my room over to the other side. I could see the liquid, so I knew it wasn't going to splash. If it looked like it, I could slow down, but I didn't need to. It rolled very smoothly. The large casters helped a lot. Once I moved it, I spun it around, I put the lid back on, plugged it back in, and I was ready to go. I had to lift it, I probably would have needed help. Luckily too, it's got handles. The handle, all I did is hold onto it and wheel it. But if it had handles and didn't have wheels, that would have been another picture. I probably would have needed someone to help me. And no offense to any manufacturer out there, but I'm always terrified a handle might break, even if they're on there like part of the metal. I'm always, worst case scenario, plan for worst case, hope for best, and everything went very smooth, smoother than I would imagine if it didn't have casters. Casters without that would have been very painful.
My experience has been glycol chillers are pretty maintenance free, but what kind of things would you have to do to a chiller eventually?
I tell you the thing, I live in Florida, and I joke to John is every time I get ready to put something on my fermenter, I open it and I look in to make sure I don't have any bugs in the glycol system. I'm in Florida. The thing's pretty tight sealed. I don't know how a bug could get in except through the back, and I don't know why they would, but it's something that in Florida, you always look for bugs. And I've been good and I've been lucky. And actually, John mentioned propylene glycol is what you use, which is not sweet, but what is sweet that you mentioned?
Ethylene.
Ethylene, and it's not food safe and it's toxic. So make sure you're using the right glycol and what the manufacturer recommends. And I know Blichmann sells the correct glycol and a very appropriate, you buy that, you add some water, you're done. And I believe it's distilled water is recommended because that's what I used. So. You just don't want a lot of mineral content or any minerals.
If you're wanting to service your pumps, or if you had to replace a pump, or maybe clean out your hose lines, I could see where it's nice to just lift the pump out and you could rinse it off, clean it out, do whatever you needed to do to it. And our system allows that. It's just the drop-in pump. You pull it out if you want to pull it out and work on it.
It was actually one of my deciding factors because there's a lot of systems out there that have really good pumps and really good temperature control built in. But my problem is, it's kind of like an all-in-one system. If something's built in and I have a problem with it, now I've got to take the thing apart. I may have to drain something to get in and get that part out. If I'm putting the part in and pulling it right back out, there's less maintenance for me. It's easier. It's the same thing like the anvil. I don't have to flip the system upside down to pull a pump out to clean it. I can just take the pump, go clean it, plug it back in, and I'm good. If you buy or own anything from Blichmann or Anvil, you already know the quality. You're not questioning the quality here because you know if you're going to order the Blichmann glycol system, you know the quality that you're going to expect. There is always a fail rate of everything, but the difference is buying something quality, you're less likely to have that happen because they've taken that into consideration. Same thing with you doing the motor right now. You're looking and trying to figure out any possible things that could happen. Now, it's not in the real world yet. In the real world, somebody's going to test something that you never expected them to test, but hey. But knowing that that testing's going on, you don't know what your competitors are doing for testing. And you also don't know if they're finally going, okay, yes, this is what I want. They call some company in another country and go, I need this made this way, here's the specs, thank you. And they're just hoping for the best and it's going to production. I have one of those pre-production items right now at home from another company. Yeah, there's all kinds of issues they found in pre-production, but instead of throwing them away, they gave them to everybody to test.
So what's your experience been with support from Blichmann Engineering? Because I mean, that's always my, one of my things is I like to buy quality things with, all of my 40 hobbies that I have. But what I like the best is knowing I'm buying by somebody that if I do have a problem, and eventually I will, they're a call away to help.
They're a phone call or an email. A lot of people nowadays don't like to be personal. They send an email or they text. It's not as intrusive as a phone call, and they feel like they don't want to be intrusive to you either. And most of the stuff I've done with Jared has all been through email, and the response time has been quick. I don't expect it to be that quick. I send an email, I'll get it the next day, and usually it's like within an hour or two I have some sort of a reply, or hey, let me take a look at this real quick, or he's got some questions to qualify the answer because I'm learning. I don't know what the problem is, but he knows what to ask to figure out which the problem might be.
So Mike, I know you spent a lot of time researching beforehand. What other companies did you look at and products, and how did you end up settling in on the Blichmann chiller?
I probably can't remember all the names of the companies, so I won't pick on names, but what I did is I went out into the forums and I looked at what other home brewers were using, and then I looked at the reviews, and I only went with ones that I felt had good reviews. I didn't pick any companies, and not to say they're off brand or off names, but maybe they weren't specialized in home brewing. And their reviews weren't that good for home brewers because they weren't catering to home brewers. After doing that, then I looked at pricing, and yes, I could have, saved a couple $100 and went down to something that maybe did less systems. But like I said, I don't want to do what I'm going to be doing at minimum. I want to do what I want to do, and I don't want to have limiting factors. It's the same reason why people, sometimes will buy a 10-gallon anvil and do a 4-gallon or 3-gallon batch, because they may want to do 5 gallons, and they want that ability to scale up with what that system. And I do 6-gallon batches into 10.5 all the time. So I wanted something that could scale with me. I wanted something that could grow with me, and I wanted the flexibility. That was huge, and I'm very big on flexibility. I grew up with a dad who worked in the power company, so I was very bad energy efficiency. One thing I joked to John, and I don't have the statistics here, it's a later video, but I've been monitoring the electricity usage throughout my entire brew space. And it's kind of a joke. The thing uses barely any power. It barely registers. I'm like, okay, I'm good. I got a fridge using more power than that thing, and the fridge barely gets opened. Yeah, the fridge should be is at least energy efficient, and it's not. I have a brand new Samsung double door fridge I bought. It's loud. I can't hear that at all, even when I'm trying to listen to it, because that fridge makes more noise. So yeah, I made a great purchase, but I was OCD. I did share that in a video because I'm just like everyone else out there. I'm learning, and if I'm not learning, I probably would not enjoy home brewing. So every time I'm learning something new, I try to share that with everybody out there. I don't try to knock anybody, because there's a lot of people with other products, and they may be great products. But the key is I knew from the Anvil, the Brew Easy, that the quality behind those products was amazing, and I knew that I wouldn't be let down if I went to the Blichmann system, and I could play around with any pump. I could play, and I have an Anvil pump and I have a Blichmann pump. I could play around with that, and I could do all this other stuff I wanted to do with the system without being held down to whatever came with it. And hey, this doesn't do heat. Well, great. Well, I can plug whatever I want if I want heat. It doesn't matter. So I like the open format, and I like the efficiency, and I like not just the quality, and I'm meeting one of the people here on it, but the amount of thought that went into the system before it was ever designed or built. That's the big key. And I'm seeing this man's out here doing all kinds of tests for future things and just running things ragged, doing the beta testing that you don't have to do. So, which some companies sadly sell you the beta, and we're definitely not getting the beta here.
Well, in the home brewing business, the beta testing is quite delicious.
Cheers.
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 Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Mike.
Thanks for listening and watching. And if this video provided you some good support, be sure to like, share, or subscribe to this video channel.